I'm about to tell you a secret. The biggest secret there is in the world. I'm telling you because I just don't know what else to do. The Skrull Empire. Dozens of worlds ruled over by a race of shape-shifting life forms. They're here now, living among us. Undetectable. Today on the Comic Book Report, Marvel's Secret Invasion. Stick around and check it out. Greetings all, my name is Dominic and today you're tuning into the Comic Book Report, where we review comic books and graphic novels so you can get an idea of what to read. And today, in honor of the upcoming Disney Plus series, I've decided to dust off Marvel's Secret Invasion. I'll be honest, it had been years since I thought about this Marvel event, but after hearing about the upcoming Disney Plus adaptation, I thought it was time to give it a read. So let's get started with our review. First, some quick facts about today's collection. The issues in this volume were written by Brian Michael Bendis and penciled by Lanil Francis Yu. The issues were first published by Marvel Comics beginning in 2008. The volume itself collects Secret Invasion issues 1 through 8. And finally, this trade paperback comes in at 248 pages. At this time, I'd like to issue a brief spoiler warning. I will be flipping through the contents of today's collection as well as commenting on plot points. You've been advised. Okay, and here's your first look at the trade paperback today. This is a standard size trade paperback from Marvel Comics. The print paper inside is a nice glossy print page. The exterior artwork is the kind of Skrullified Avengers, a very haunting image. It almost evokes a kind of zombie apocalypse kind of situation, which while this event is far from that, seeing the kind of Skrullified Avengers is quite creepy, at least in my opinion, and it was certainly evocative enough when I saw this advertised. And as we finish our look at the exterior cover to the book before diving into the collection proper, I would just like to provide a bit of context as to when this event took place. For those that aren't familiar with some of the Marvel event history timeline, this Secret Invasion event takes place shortly after the Marvel Civil War and prior to the Dark Reign era. Being sandwiched in between those other events, you can understand that this was a very turbulent time for our favorite heroes. Without spoiling the events of the Marvel Civil War, I'll just say that a lot of the heroes find themselves still very mistrustful of one another. So early on in this book, when you realize that there are shape-shifting aliens that have completely infiltrated the ranks of not only government and officials and regular people, but also heroes, also the Avengers, also S.H.I.E.L.D., you can understand that the tension between these heroes who were already maybe mistrustful during this era are even more paranoid being around each other and trying to sort out and sift through how to deal with this crisis as they slowly begin to understand that they have been completely infiltrated by the Skrulls already. And in case you didn't know, that's the overarching story of the Secret Invasion event. It's that the Skrull Empire, the race of shape-shifting aliens, has already kind of infiltrated the world and has already kind of populated itself and impersonated a lot of high-ranking officials. And essentially, when Secret Invasion occurs and they've kind of out these Skrulls as being part of them, the war is almost already over in favor of the Skrulls. And it's the Avengers' last-ditch effort to try to thwart this alien horde that's already infiltrated. And boy, it was a pretty fun ride. I know for me, in general, I'm not a really big fan of comic book events. I think that sometimes they hog too much of the spotlight and sometimes can interrupt really good comic book runs with tie-ins or things like that. That being said, I will say every so often an event comes along that catches my interest and that I find myself really enjoying. And while Secret Invasion isn't in my top tier list of Marvel events, it was still pretty darn good. Funnily enough, when I was thinking about this book after hearing about the upcoming Disney Plus series, I thought that I had already read this book, and it's still possible that I had, but I realized when I started this book that I was really thinking of Secret Invasion, The Infiltration, which is sort of a prequel trade paperback that establishes this event series, and it culminates with them finding out that Elektra Natchios was actually a Skrull, which of course led them to wonder when their Elektra had actually gone missing, etc., etc. So I just remembered them figuring out that Elektra was a Skrull, and I was like, wow, when is that part going to happen? Only to find out that they have Elektra's Skrull body at the beginning of this comic, and I was like, oh man, I actually read this other trade paperback, and I hardly remembered this one. So it's possible I read this shortly after it came out, but I honestly don't even remember. Either way, rereading it for this review was a lot of fun, because effectively I felt like I was reading a brand new Marvel event. As far as the characters you follow, you primarily follow the Avengers, but there's also a good deal of other teams. You have kind of a young Avengers show up, you have S.H.I.E.L.D. There's so many teams that are just trying to save the world after the Skrulls plot is revealed. I think one of my highlights was seeing the tension between the factions of hero characters after Civil War. There's a lot of mistrust, a lot of confusion, a lot of still hurt feelings, to say the least. I think that this event could definitely stand alone by itself, but I think if you've read the Marvel Civil War already, it makes this event pack even more punch, as you get to see why some of the heroes are situated in the ways that they are. I think another highlight as well is to see how they treated Tony Stark's character of Iron Man in this volume. Iron Man was a very big voice in the whole Marvel Civil War event, and regardless of whether or not you think he was right, there's a general perception that he might have overstepped, at the very least certainly alienated a lot of his beloved colleagues. So in this, it was a really fun surprise that they kind of tried to suggest, is Tony Stark a Skrull? Has he been a Skrull all throughout the Marvel Civil War? Is that why he did this, or not? I won't spoil that for you. Suffice it to say, it was a really fun, is he or isn't he? And what does that really make me think about Tony Stark as a character after the events of Civil War and going forward? And I think that it's a really interesting character piece for that character, for fans of Iron Man. And generally, there's just a lot to love about this book. There's some really good moments with Jessica Jones and Luke Cage, some fun and cheeky Spider-Man throughout, and even some appearances from Nick Fury, who has a pivotal role to play in the story. For fans of the MCU, I would assume that Nick Fury's role in this is maybe your most interesting point for those that are prospective readers of this series. I know at the time of the recording, there's an upcoming Disney Plus series that's supposed to premiere next year, starring Nick Fury, our Sam Jackson, of course. And I have to say, knowing how the MCU adapts comic book source material, I doubt that that actual event is going to look anything like this comic here, other than a few incidental characters and, of course, the presence of the Skrulls. But hey, I could be surprised. All I know is that with it coming out, I thought that this was a perfect shot to throw back to this event from 2008. Now that I've spoken about the overall plotline a bit, I also want to take a moment to talk about the art throughout from you. This was really something that stood out to me. This wasn't maybe the best event art I've ever seen, but it was still very gorgeous, highly detailed, maybe a little bit more animated than my preferred style of comic book art, but wow, I was still really impressed at the level of detail and how they adapted almost all of the Marvel heroes I could think of offhand. There are so many appearances from so many iconic and favorite characters, and even secondary and tertiary level characters, and it was really great to see. I wonder if this artist had a blast just adapting so many of these characters fighting and at war, and even fighting each other. It was interesting to see some of these heroes fighting each other, possibly for the first time. Granted, some of them might have been Skrulls, but they still certainly looked like our heroes that we know. I think one of the things I loved about this volume overall was the way we got these 2-page splash pages of epic battles. I feel like the art was just off the rails amazing for this. We had these widespread, just epic scenes of conflict right before the battle line is drawn, and I don't know that I've seen this in a ton of other books. This book had the most cinematic scope as far as battle scenes with our heroes go that I've read in quite some time. And I just have to say kudos to you. Brilliantly done, well paneled, and I was never pulled out of it because of the art. The art kept me fully engaged and grounded throughout the entire narrative. I felt like it fit what Bendis was trying to convey just wonderfully. And I think when you have this idea that there's so much shape changing happening and friends against friends, and how do you convey facial expressions and certain character dynamics, how do you convey mistrust in interesting ways, or how do each of these characters process paranoia and mistrust? And we were certainly treated to a generous sampling of what that might look like. I think that this series really upended a lot of these heroes' sense of comfort and safety. And this whole book had some really just high momentum, high octane moments that I just felt like I was flung from one action sequence to the next. Frankly, it was hard to put this down. And in my mind, that's a great quality to have for an event series. And now that we've finished our collection here, all that's left is to give this event a grade. For some of the most gorgeous double splash page battle scenes I've ever seen, coupled with competent writing and a strong cast of characters, The Comic Book Report is proud to give Marvel's Secret Invasion a B-. This is an above-average collection with a truly memorable villainous plot. It's rare that I see so many heroes on edge and pushed to their limits. This was a near-perfect concept with a decent execution, and I for one am looking forward to the Disney Plus series. Have you read Marvel's Secret Invasion? Let me know in the comments below. And until next time, this has been The Comic Book Report. Thank you so much for stopping by. Don't forget to leave me a like, a comment, and check out some of our other videos. Have a good one.